In 1650 BC, a city of 8,000 people ceased to exist in seconds, not in minutes, not over the course of a day. Seconds. The people who lived there did not have time to run. They did not have time to grab their children. The city was standing, and then it was not. When archaeologists excavated the site, now known as Tal el-Haman in the Jordan Valley, they found something that did not fit any natural explanation they were comfortable with. The mud bricks, the basic building material of every structure in the city, had melted into glass. Not cracked from heat, not scorched on the surface, melted. The way sand melts into glass, which requires temperatures above 2,000 degrees Celsius. No volcanic eruption in recorded history produces temperatures that high at ground level. No known wildfire comes close. Inside the destruction layer, the thin band of soil where the city ended, they found zircon crystals that only form under extreme pressure and heat. They found an iridium spike, the chemical signature most famously associated with the asteroid impact that ended the age of the dinosaurs. They found material almost identical to trinitite, the glassy substance left behind after nuclear detonations in the Nevada desert. The research team published their findings in the journal Nature Scientific Reports in 2021. Their conclusion was that a low-altitude cosmic airburst, an asteroid or comet that detonated in the atmosphere above the city, had released energy approximately 1,000 times greater than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The city of Tal el-Haman was erased in a single moment, and every organic trace above the destruction layer vanished. What came after is almost stranger than the event itself. For 600 years, the land stayed empty. A fertile valley in one of the most consistently inhabited regions on Earth sat without a single structure. You do not leave good agricultural land abandoned for 6 centuries unless something about the place makes return unthinkable. But Tal el-Haman is only the beginning, because when you look across history, a pattern appears. Cities buried in a single night, advanced settlements that vanished from the record not through slow decline, but through a single, sudden event. And in almost every case, the same questions emerge. Where did the people go? What happened to the records? And why did the world above them move on so quickly? In the winter of 373 BC, on the northern coast of the Peloponnese in ancient Greece, the animals left first. The historian Aelian wrote that 5 days before the disaster, every rat, snake, weasel, and centipede that lived in the city of Helike abandoned their homes and began moving toward the mountains. People watched them go. Some found it strange. Nobody followed. Helike was not a minor settlement. It was the capital of the Achaean League, the most powerful political confederation in Greece at the time. Its temple to Poseidon was famous across the Mediterranean. The bronze statue inside the temple was so tall and so recognizable that passing ships used it as a navigation landmark. The city held tens of thousands of people, managed trade across a significant portion of the ancient world, and kept detailed records of the agreements and transactions that held the League together. On an ordinary winter night, a massive earthquake struck beneath the Corinthian Gulf. The sea pulled back from the shore first, the water retreating in the way it does before a tsunami. Then it returned, not as a wave, as a wall. By morning, Helike was gone. A fleet of Spartan ships arrived the next day. They were not sent for rescue. There was nobody to rescue. They came to salvage what could be recovered from the sea. They found nothing. The tips of trees broke the surface of the water where the city had been. Sailors in the following years claimed they could see the bronze statue of Poseidon still standing upright on the seabed, arms outstretched, as if waiting. Over the following decades, sediment covered even that. For more than 2,000 years, Hiliki was considered a myth, a story Plato and others repeated as a moral warning about divine punishment. In 2001, after years of survey work, the archaeologist Dora Katsonopoulou located the city. It was not under open water, as almost everyone had assumed. It was buried beneath a coastal lagoon, covered by layers of sediment, lying about 5 meters below the current surface. The streets were intact, the buildings were recognizable, objects were still in place exactly as they had been on the night the animals left. And yet, for a city that went under suddenly in the middle of the night, the one thing that archaeology expected to find in abundance was almost entirely absent: human remains. For a city of tens of thousands, the recovered skeletal evidence is remarkably sparse. What you would expect from a sudden nighttime disaster simply is not there in the numbers the archaeology demands. Several thousand kilometers to the east, on the volcanic island of Thera, now known as Santorini, a city made the same preparation, but in a very different way. The Minoan settlement of Akrotiri sat on the edge of one of the most dangerous volcanoes in human history. Around 1600 BC, that volcano began signaling what was coming. Small earthquakes, ground deformation, probably a preliminary eruption event that gave the residents enough warning to act. And act they did, with extraordinary organization. When archaeologists began excavating Akrotiri in the 1960s, they uncovered a city that had been deliberately and carefully abandoned. 3-story buildings still stood under more than 60 meters of hardened volcanic ash. The walls were covered in vivid frescoes, paintings of blue monkeys, of children boxing, of an entire fleet of painted ships arriving in a festive harbor. Storage jars were sealed and full. Furniture was arranged normally. Tools were in their proper locations. Not a single body was found. And, more strikingly, almost no gold, no silver, and no jewelry of any significance appeared anywhere in the site. In an entire buried city, with intact rooms, intact storage areas, and intact private spaces, the valuables were gone. Every household had been deliberately cleared of its precious items before the doors were closed for the last time. A population we estimate at somewhere between 30,000 and 40,000 people left their city in an organized manner, taking their wealth and their identity with them. The volcano then buried everything they left behind under ash deep enough to preserve it for 3,500 years. Where those people went, where an entire civilization's refugees settled after their island was destroyed, remains one of archaeology's genuinely open questions. No mass migration of that scale from that time and region has been conclusively identified anywhere. Moving forward in time to 79 AD and to the southern coast of Italy, the story of the eruption of Vesuvius is one most people think they know. Pompeii, the ash casts, the preserved bodies in their final moments of fear. But Pompeii is not the more disturbing of the two cities Vesuvius destroyed that day. Herculaneum is. And Herculaneum is the city that almost nobody talks about, for reasons that are themselves a story. Pompeii was buried under 4 to 6 meters of volcanic ash. Herculaneum was hit by the pyroclastic surge, a superheated cloud of gas and pulverized rock that moved at speeds up to 100 kilometers per hour and carried temperatures approaching 500 degrees Celsius. The surge buried Herculaneum under up to 23 meters of material, several times deeper than its more famous neighbor. Forensic studies of the skeletal remains found at Herculaneum, published in academic literature, describe what that surge did to human bodies. The heat was so sudden and so extreme that the fluid inside the skulls of victims turned to steam instantly. The bones carry chemical traces of vaporized blood. The evidence suggests death was effectively instantaneous for anyone caught in the open. Herculaneum held somewhere between 4,000 and 20,000 people. Its exact population is uncertain because, here is the crucial detail, most of the city has never been excavated. Estimates suggest that only about a quarter of the ancient city has been uncovered. The remaining 3/4 lies directly beneath the modern town of Ercolano, a living community of approximately 50,000 residents built on top of the buried city. We have known this since 1738, when workers digging a well in Ercolano broke through into an ancient theater still intact below ground. That discovery was over 280 years ago. The theater is still there, still sealed, still waiting. The entire contents of a major Roman port city, its libraries, its records, its artifacts, its private homes of the wealthy and the poor alike, lie in extraordinary preservation beneath a neighborhood of apartment buildings and corner shops. Funding has been secured and then lost. Excavations have started and then paused. The logistical challenges of excavating beneath a living city are real, but the result is that a city destroyed overnight in 79 AD remains, 3/4 of it, exactly as it was left. We know it is there. We know roughly what it contains. We have not reached it. The 5th city on this journey is not ancient. It was buried in living memory, and it was buried with witnesses, with photographs, and with a government that was warned. Armero was a small Colombian town with approximately 29,000 residents. It sat on a flat plain below the Nevado del Ruiz volcano, in the channel where geologists had always known volcanic mud flows would travel if the mountain became active. In September 1985, the volcano began showing signs of serious activity. Scientists from the Colombian Geological Survey began monitoring it closely. In October 1985, they completed a hazard map. The map was clear and detailed. It showed the exact river valleys and plains that would be filled with lahars, volcanic mud flows, if the glacier at the volcano's summit melted significantly during an eruption. Armero was marked on that map. It was marked in red. The map was delivered to civil defense authorities. Briefings were held. Emergency planning was discussed. No evacuation was ordered. On the night of November 13th, the volcano erupted. The eruption itself was moderate in terms of volcanic standards, but it was enough. Around 10% of the summit glacier melted within minutes, releasing approximately 60 million cubic meters of water that mixed immediately with loose volcanic debris. The lahar moved down the river channels at roughly 60 kilometers per hour. It reached Armero at 11:35 in the evening. Most of the town's residents were asleep. At 11:45, 10 minutes after the flow arrived, Armero was buried under approximately 8 meters of volcanic mud. Around 25,000 of the town's 29,000 residents died, the vast majority of them never waking. In the hours before the flow arrived, a local radio station was broadcasting messages from officials telling residents to remain calm and stay in their homes. The evacuation that could have been ordered weeks earlier, based on a clearly marked and officially distributed hazard map, never came. The Colombian government declared Armero a mass grave. It was never rebuilt. The site today is a field of grey, hardened mud, broken by the tips of buried walls, the exposed skeleton of a church, a stopped clock, a school with its roof partially collapsed inward, the interior still visible, still frozen in the exact moment the mud arrived. Tour guides lead visitors through it. The 20,000 bodies still in the mud lie beneath your feet as you walk. Armero was buried in 10 minutes. Everything inside it stopped. The city is still there, exactly as it was left. The last city in this account was buried not by any natural force, but by a decision made in a meeting room. In June of 1889, a fire started in a downtown Seattle cabinet shop, and within hours had consumed approximately 25 city blocks. The city needed to be rebuilt. City engineers had long argued that Seattle's original street level was a mistake. The area flooded frequently, the sewage system was inadequate. The fire gave them an opportunity to start over. Rather than rebuild on the existing ground level, they designed a new city, 1 to 2 stories higher, constructing new exterior walls around the old foundations and filling in the spaces between. The original street-level entrances, the original sidewalks, the original storefronts with their signs and glass and wooden counters became enclosed underground spaces connected by brick corridors. The new city was built above. Within 1 generation, most of Seattle's residents had no direct memory of the buried level below them. Children grew up in a city that had no visible trace of its previous self. By the early 20th century, the underground spaces were used informally for storage, occasionally for less lawful purposes, and then largely forgotten. In 1965, a local journalist named Bill Speidel began offering guided tours of what he called the Seattle Underground. The original city was still there. It had been sealed and forgotten, but it had not been destroyed. You could walk through it. You could read the old store signs. You could stand on the original wooden sidewalks and look up at the reinforced ceiling that was now the floor of a modern city block above you. The Seattle Underground still operates tours today. You can visit it this week if you choose. But consider what that means. A city was physically buried by deliberate human decision in 1889. It happened in an era with newspapers, with photographs, with city records, with living witnesses who remembered both the fire and the rebuilding. And still, within 1 generation, the buried city was functionally forgotten. It required a journalist in 1965 to bring it back into public awareness, 76 years after the burial. If a city can be buried and forgotten within a single human lifetime in the age of photography and public records, what happened to cities buried before any of that existed? What happened to cities buried before writing, or buried by events that also destroyed the writing? All 6 of these cities share something beyond the fact of sudden burial. In each case, key elements of the expected evidence are missing. The populations of Hilike and Akrotiri are archaeologically almost invisible given the scale of the cities. The records of institutions like the Achaean League and the administrative archives of a major Roman port have not appeared in the excavations that have been possible. Armero's warning documents were produced, distributed, and then effectively ignored in a way that has never resulted in a formal reckoning. And across the ancient cases, the burial events cluster near the transitions between historical periods. The destruction of Tal el-Haman precedes the Bronze Age collapse by a matter of centuries. Akrotiri falls in the period of Minoan decline. Hilike's destruction weakened a league that had been a stabilizing force in Greek politics for generations. The burial of Herculaneum belongs to the long, slow contraction of Roman imperial reach. Each of these cities was not merely a place where people lived. Each held records, institutions, knowledge systems, and cultural continuity that disappeared along with the city itself. There is a word in archaeology for the physical remnant of a buried city. It is called a tell, a mound formed not by geology, but by the layering of human settlements over centuries, each generation building on the ruins of the last. Across the ancient Middle East alone, there are tens of thousands of identified tells that have never been excavated. We know what they are. We have mapped them from satellites. We can see their shapes in aerial photography with complete clarity. Most of them have never been touched. The official explanation is resources. The unofficial explanation is simply priority. There are so many that the question of which ones to excavate and what might be found inside them has become a bureaucratic and academic question rather than an urgent one. But inside each of those mounds is a frozen moment, a city stopped in time, preserved by the very event that ended it, waiting with its streets and its objects and its unread documents for someone to decide it is worth uncovering. The cities that were buried overnight did not cease to exist. They continued to exist exactly as they were in the earth beneath the places we walk. Time stopped for them. For us, time moved on, and the surface above them changed hands a dozen times before anyone thought to ask what was below. The real question is not how a city gets buried. Nature is perfectly capable of burying a city in a single night, and so, as Seattle demonstrates, are human beings. The real question is what we choose to do with that knowledge. Whether we dig, or whether we build on top of it and learn, within a generation, not to ask what is underneath. Every city on this list is still there. The evidence is still present. The answers to the questions they raise are not lost. They are buried. And the difference between buried and lost is simply a decision about whether or not to dig. Use the reference voice and make audio in one response using 11 Labs v3 Alpha. Make sure the audio should have same voice of the reference voice and make the voice like a documentary.